Well, a very good morning to you on this glorious morning. It's fairly cool, I suppose, about 14 degrees, which is fairly cool for August, I guess. Very still, and I am in Aberdeenshire, not far from Arboyne actually, just south of Arboyne. I'm at Bridge of Dye, and that is on the Cairn Mount Road, the high road that goes up over 400 metres, climbs to an incredible height. Tortuous switchbacks to get up here. And today I'm heading up Clachnaben, stone of the hill, literally, I believe. Clach meaning stone, Ben, we all know what that means. And I believe the main recommended path goes down the way and goes up this glen here. Well, it says path, so clearly it's that way, but I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to head up through this forest, skirting around, going up this hill here, which I think is called Mount Shade. Although you can never really tell with the pronunciations around here, can you? It's probably Sharda or something like that, but Mount Shade. That one up there goes straight up that and sort of keeping to the high ground all the way up to Clachnaben, and then going beyond it a bit and then down into the upper reaches of Glen Dye, which is just over that ridgeline. I don't know if it's just me. I don't think I'm the only person to have said it this year, but it does seem to have been a very good year for heathers. I say heathers plural because we've got several types in here. This, the distinctive purple of Ling common heather, which has got flowers going all the way up the stem there, and then we've got bell heather, which is a much more sort of vivid purple here. And it only has flowers at the top of the stems there, and it's just together it's a real mix. You've got these ones here as well, the sort of brown ones are the seeds that have already gone over in the bell heather, so it gives the whole thing a really nice sort of dappled appearance, but just different grades of purple, mauve with this brown interspersed. And it does seem to have been, certainly back in Fife in the Lomond Hills, it seems to have been a very vivid year for heathers. Like any plants, any sort of naturally occurring events throughout the nature calendar year, things like the browning of the leaves or the leaves coming out in spring, how big a crop you get of berries on trees, how big the brambles are this year, all those things are obviously dependent upon the weather that's gone before. So I don't know whether or what has led to this great colourful display this year, but I certainly feel it has been a strangely vivid year, and you've got to think about the kinds of weather we've had this year. What have we had? We had a very, very dry spring, record-breaking. Was it May or April was the driest ever in Edinburgh and Fife, followed by one of the wettest Junes on record, going flip-flopping from one extreme to the other. But for whatever reason, I think it does seem to have made the hills, and we'll see it later once we get up there, but just the purple tinge to all the hills this year has been extremely vivid, I think. Anyway, kind of wittering away already without saying where I've been for months and months and months. It's the 25th of August. We're right at the tail end of summer now. Meteorological autumn starts next week. God, it's felt like an eternity, but we're finally there. And I really haven't been out much this summer. I was up on Blethering Ben 2 weeks ago, for reasons I'll come to in a bit. And before that, the only big hill I'd done was it Clachnaben in the Cairngorms, and that was back in the end of May. I didn't do a blog for that one. That was when we had that amazing weather in April and May, where it's so dry and warm, sunny, and it was a baking hot day cycling up Glen Tilt. But it was wonderful. I mean, it's just extraordinary visibility up in that part of the Cairngorms. I had a lovely time, just sat up near the summit for an hour or so. Just expansive views north into the central Cairngorms, and that was wonderful, but really way too hot for me. And that signalled the end of my hill walking for the summer pretty much. Not to mention the fact that as I was walking out of one of the small glens that radiates out south from the summit and back into Glen Tilt, came down through a broad grassy glen And I've never had a problem with ticks in high Cairngorms, that, you know, in April, May time. But I was getting water from a burn, and then when I was sort of leaning on the grass, and when I got up again, I noticed there was ticks crawling everywhere. I mean, really small ones. And I looked, and by the time about half an hour later as I got out of this glen, I must have brushed 30 or 40 ticks off my clothes. I can't remember ever having such a profusion and such a problem with them so early on. It was a mild, peculiar winter, and for whatever reason, it does seem to be a noticeable ramping up of tick numbers in places where you wouldn't typically see them that time of year. So that was a bit distressing. So maybe it's no wonder I haven't been out very much over the summer. I've seen a lot of butterflies coming up here just in the last 15 minutes. A lot of red admirals, peacocks, small tortoiseshells. There's loads of them fluttering over the heather. It's the most I've seen in one place all summer, I think. And it's good to see, because butterflies are really suffering with our erratic weather these days. 2016, last year, after the Great Butterfly Count, which is done every year, massive citizen science public survey, lots of species are really having their worst year on record. So it's not great. So it's always good to see them, although you kind of forget about how many you used to see. Not long ago, 5-10 years ago, you used to see a lot more. So now you see them and think, oh, butterflies must be doing well, but really, not that long ago they were doing much better. It's just a really lovely, quiet, I mean, there's a plane there now, so it's not as quiet as it was, but there was just butterflies going around, dragonflies whizzing around. And I know it's not the most natural of forests, because it's one of those spruce plantations that I'm usually so judgmental about. But with the heather and just this constant hum of bees, when you stop, all you can hear is this not that's a plane. But there's a lot buzzing around, a lot of insect life. So there are things living in these kinds of places. When you get them on a nice day, sun shining, everything's purple. It's lovely. But then that's what summer does. Usually in its dying throes, it chucks up a few cooler days, good visibility, not much haze, calm, no midges to be seen. And you start to sort of think, well, I start to sort of think, maybe it's not so bad. But really, it's summer that's the reason I haven't been out, haven't made any more blogs. And it's only when you get the sense that the colours are changing on the hill, the quality of light's changing, and it's cooling down a bit. You can just feel, I mean, the leaves are changing. The beech and the maple are going already. And especially when the heather starts to go over, which some of it is, you can feel autumn coming. And I dare say we'll have some strange anomalous heat in September or October, as we always seem to get these days. But I'm thrilled that summer is on the slide and on its way out. And this year in particular, my hay fever, it's the worst it's ever been, I think, since 1995. I remember it well, going to visit my family down in Surrey and having to go back home down to Portsmouth, where I lived at the time, early because it was so bad and I couldn't breathe. That was the worst I can remember it. But May and June this year were just awful. Never had hay fever like it in decades. Every year I get more, it seems, allergic to summer. If not sort of in a hay fever sense, but in just sort of physiologically. Just my very being just balks at the humidity and just everything about summer. I'm just, apart from the wildlife, is the only good thing. I guess. The wildlife does need the warmth, and I get a lot out of that. But it tends to be why in the summer I hang around much more local to where I stay, so I'm quite content just pootling around in the Lomond Hills or in Fife more widely, and don't really go anywhere else. The crowds as well, and there's lots of roadworks up the A9 around Perth just now, and I just can't face it. I think part of me's got just a bit fed up of driving the same roads week in, week out. I don't know if anybody else feels this, you know, because there's only so many routes you can take to get to the hills up north. So you're either going through up the A9, which can be a bit of a trauma at the best of times, or you're going, for me, through Crieff, Cymru to Loch Ernhead around there, and using that way of getting to the hills. And I just can't face it after a commute now. I work 35 miles away from home, so I've got a big commute. I've got an hour's drive either side of work, and the last thing I want to do on my days off is drive big distances. So I think that's part of the reason I've come where I am today in this part of Aberdeenshire, because going through Dundee and up the A90 towards Aberdeen, I never go. This isn't a route I go up at all, and this is an area in itself is new for me. So it feels like, it doesn't feel like such a, I don't have this instant, I don't balk at the idea of driving along this road. Actually, my summer drought in terms of hill walking and blogs it's not for want of trying, if I'm honest. But it sounds really bad from a hill walker, but frequently I just can't be bothered. For the reasons I've outlined, but also just don't feel the motivation. This morning, I knew I was going to succeed, because last night, once I settled on a destination, this here, I felt excited about heading out, and I haven't felt that way since the beginning of the year. And I think you can't fight that. Well, for me, I find I can't, there's no use in me trying to fight that apathy in some sense. I think if the motivation's not there, I don't want to force it. I don't want to resent heading out. I think certainly I've found that my experience of hill walking and just the way I go about it has changed significantly over the years, and I think I'm definitely more discerning, more fussy about when I head out and in what conditions. That's another reason, I suppose, why a lot of the walks that I kind of had half planned this summer haven't come off, is because the weather's not been up to much. I mean, obviously I'm not summer's biggest fan anyway, but once we got out of that really settled spell in sort of the end of May, beginning of June, it's been unusually well, I'd say unusually unsettled, but it seems to be the norm these days of having these unsettled summers. Showery, with low pressure nearby, lots of cloud, wind and rain, and I really need a bit more than that if it's going to entice me out during the summer, which is why this is quite enticing today. It's nice. Something else that hasn't helped matters this year. No sooner had I hope, got my knee under control, my knee traumas, I developed a frozen shoulder, and I'd never even heard of that. No sooner had I mentioned it to friends and colleagues, everyone seems to have had it. But if you're not familiar with it, I don't know what goes on in there. It's my left shoulder, and it just seizes up, and I can't put, it's getting a bit better. So there's a flying ant. It's getting a bit better now. I can actually do these things now, but you couldn't put a belt on because you can't get your arm behind your shoulder. I can't fold my arms, can't put my seatbelt on, can't reach behind me, can't lift. My arm would only go up about that far before it starts really hurting, and it's not just pain, it's an actual physical blockage. Really peculiar. Now I can do my Heil Hitler as my boss calls it, says, can you do your whole Hitlers? I can get up quite high now, so it's getting better. Everyone said, there's nothing you can do, just keep it moving, bit of physio, a bit of, try to force it a little bit, but really, you just have to let it sort itself out in its own time, which it will do anything between 6 months and 2 years, which is a really depressing thing to be told. And you do wonder whether it will ever fix itself, but I've never ever felt pain like it. Every time I knocked my arm, if I was out walking, rucksacks, I can't put rucksacks on, take rucksacks off, or put jumpers on or jumpers off, because it's that, all those movements are just agony. And every now and then, I'm through the worst of it now, but you'd knock it, and it was crippling pain. I mean, you know when you shiver unexpectedly, you sort of go, ooh. I was at the printer at work and shivered unexpectedly, and that's the first time that had happened since I'd had the problem, and it was such pain. I collapsed on the floor. Every time I had this knocking on doors, a jolt, anything, fall to the floor in absolute agony, and it would subside after about 15-20 seconds. And I just had my work colleagues staring at me going, what is wrong with you? So it's a really strange thing, but I'm over the worst of it. So that hasn't helped, because I can't get rucksacks on and off. So that's been a bit of a hindrance. Well, this is a bit of a hard slog getting up here. I'm for the most part using sheep tracks through the heather, but so it's not so bad getting into late August, September, but certainly in June, July, you don't want to be wading through heather, long grass, off path, if you can help it, because there's lots of ground nesting birds that are hiding, and even once they've had their chicks, you know, a lot of these birds will stay on the ground, and you can hear them chirping, you can hear them running around at great speed underneath the heather sometimes, and all the blaeberry. So they're places to avoid for much of the summer, but when you get to the tail end of the summer, it's not such a big thing, but it's something to be aware of, and you should still try and stick to decent animal tracks where you can. Finally, come on. The heather seems to be winning out over blaeberry in this part of the world, but there's a few here. But one good thing about summer is munching your way up the hill with blaeberries. Although it's much better to get a small handful of them as you're walking up and then have them all at once, and you get that much more intense flavour that comes in. Lovely stuff. We have been keeping an eye out all this way, and that's the first I've seen. Oh, there's more appearing now. So there we go. It's the summit of Mount Shade, I believe it's called, and up there, up ahead, is the very distinctive summit rock of Clachnaben. It's not huge. I think it's only about 589 metres, maybe. Clachnaben, I think. Not very big. And you start off from quite a height as well. So it's not a massive climb. It's quite tortuous coming up through that, but nice paths, clear paths. Very Cairngorms, isn't it? Anyway, I think it's as good a point as any to stop for something to eat. See it over there, very distinctive, that rock. I'd never seen it before. This isn't a part of the world I really know, and it wasn't until I think it was about a year ago, September time, I spent a few days in Ballater, and we were driving back through a Boyne and then came over the Cairn Mount, which is the road all the way over there, came this way round and saw this big craggy tor on top of there and thought, what is that? And I was quite surprised to find that I didn't know what hill it was, and I couldn't name it. I don't think I'd actually knowingly, consciously heard of Clachnaben. But so it was that driving up there and thinking that looks a really great thing to go and aim for. So I've been meaning to come here for quite some time, but it's amazing, isn't it, how you can have these striking features in the landscape which are iconic to the people that probably live around here, every bit as much as Benvironment is over there, or anywhere like, you know, the Lomond Hills where I stay, or Arthur's Seat. These things are iconic, and you think surely everyone knows of these hills, but I'd never heard of it, I don't think. So it's nice to come and try something new to an area that I've not explored before. There's actually again something I've not heard of. I had to read up on it and find out. But there's sort of a couplet concerning Clachnaben and Benvironment, the other hill that's all the way over there. If I zoom in, you can see all the way over there. You see, it's got the same kind of profile. It's a rounded hill with a bit of a knob on top, with a prominent point. So it's got another tor on top, another granite tor like this one does. And there's this couplet. It's Clachnaben and Benvironment are trois landmarks frères. I can't do accents, but you get the idea. It's like saying that this one, Clachnaben and Benvironment over there, are two landmarks you can see from the ocean out from the North Sea. I did read somewhere somebody was saying that it's because when you're, I don't know if this is true, I hope it is because it's really nice, that, you know, boats coming into Aberdeen, you put Clachnaben on one side, you put Benvironment on the other, and Aberdeen's slap bang in the middle between the two. I don't know if that's true. I can't really see any sea out there. I think maybe there's a horizon out there, but Aberdeen will be over somewhere over there. So I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to think it is, because it's nice. I like the idea of sort of sailors lining up these two hills, but given what our weather's like, both out at sea and on the tops of these hills, it's a miracle that anyone can ever line anything up, if it's true. Actually, I can now see Aberdeen over there. I can just see a few high-rise glistening in the sun. Now the sun's shining over there. So yes, it would seem that you can see Aberdeen Harbour from up here, or at least Aberdeen, the city, the outskirts. So maybe there's some truth in it. Right. Oh, we're losing a fair bit of height now, which is just quite nice after a fairly inactive summer. It's nice to get back into the swing of things, get your legs moving again in a run up to autumn and winter. One thing I realised when I was out on Ben Moor and Stobinin a couple of weeks ago is you notice when you don't get out into the hills much, that hill fitness falls away very quickly. So I did feel it, that I wasn't quite ready for the rigours of winter that will be upon us before long. Well, the people are now at the top, and you can get a real sense now of just how big the granite summit is. Yeah, look at that. See all those folk crawling around at the top there. Yeah, you don't really get a sense of scale unless you can see people up there. So I hope that helps a little bit to give a sense of the place. It's quite a big group to be out all together like that. I'm wondering if it's a Ramblers group. And that actually is another reason I've not been out quite so much in the big hills this summer. Don't think I've mentioned it in any of these vlogs, but I was immensely privileged and a bit taken aback to be approached for the honorary role of honorary president of Ramblers Scotland back in February time, and the appointment was made in March. And since then I've had a few engagements to do. I mean, there's lots of stuff about, you know, the Ramblers down south and the Ramblers Scotland. I do a lot of work in terms of legislation and lobbying and access and all those sorts of things. And for me, that's what the organisation was about. You know, before I got involved personally, for me, the Ramblers have always been this sort of one of the guiding voices, I suppose, who I look to for ideas and their thoughts on important issues, national issues in terms of access to the outdoors and getting healthy and walking and that kind of thing. But since I've been involved, you realise it's the part that you don't really realise unless you're going out and walking week in, week out, is it's the membership. That's the really important thing, and it's the people who get out and do. There's the 54 groups in Scotland across the country who have 3,500 walks a year. You know, that's the important core. Well, you know, they're the important element at the core of everything that Ramblers does. And so I suppose you can take the role in many different ways, but what I've come to see the role as now is actually trying to get out and meet as many groups as I can, speak to as many members as I can, and just do whatever I can using the social media presence I've got and whatever presence I do have, just to try and promote what the Ramblers do, what Ramblers Scotland does in terms of health and walks and provision for those kinds of things, and promote all the different groups in the different parts of Scotland, just to show people the immense variety of walks that are done. It's, you know, you'd be surprised. I've been surprised. The first walk I went out with them, the first walk I did back in, I think it was April, I was quite taken aback by the pace. And every walk since then has been like that. But anyway, I've tried to get out with one group per month. The first one I ever did, the first Ramblers group I went out with, was Eildon Ramblers down in the Borders. Also been out with Stirling and Falkirk. That was a nice local walk up Bishop Hill in the Lomond Hills, so local to me. And again, an incredible pace that they put on. And one of the ladies there, she was 81 going on 82, and she had done her first 3 Munros of her life in the past year with the Ramblers group. So it's just not what you expect. Also, who else have been out with? I've been out with Tayside Young Walkers. We went up Benarty Hill again in the Lomond Hills with them, and then the one I went on 2 weeks ago was with Linlithgow Ramblers, which is a really big group with quite an incredible programme of walks they've got on all year round. They have Wednesdays and weekends, but I went on a walk up Stobbinnon and Benmore with them, and it was graded as being quite a, you know, not a slow walk, but it was a good pace going up from Inverloch Larrig straight up the hill like that. It's a steep way up that hill. So I've been really impressed at the professionalism of all these people, just because they've got to have walk leaders and have training and feel competent in leading other people, you know, and they're so friendly. And invariably all these walks end up in tea rooms or pubs or something, so that's always the nice bit at the end of the walk. But it's been really eye-opening, and so now I've got through. Also been out with Edinburgh Young Walkers as well, to a small extent, in Edinburgh on a walk over Carlton Hill. So I've done a few things, but so 4 or 5 groups I've done. There's 54, so I've got 49. No, sorry, that's terrible maths. Yeah, 49. I've done 5. I suppose I've done 5. So yeah, I've got about 49 groups to go through over the next couple of years or so. So it's a bit of a challenge, but it's good fun. Oh, look at this. That's a beauty. And I couldn't tell you offhand what that's going to turn into. Usually when you get the bigger, more attractive caterpillars like that, it tends to mean they're moths. Got to be careful. I think sometimes some of the hairs can be quite jag you, I think. I'm not wrong in saying that. But this and other things like it are the reason why it takes me an age to get around hills these days. If I choose routes, you know, fairly lengthy routes, the sorts of routes that I would have just done, you know, 3 or 4 years ago without thinking, these days I often don't even finish them because I get distracted by things like this. Not just caterpillars, I mean anything. Pretty much anything. I'll be getting the camera out and photographing weird and wonderful wildlife, flora and fauna. Just find it endlessly fascinating. And I didn't used to. I used to just rush around hills and not even take notice of what kinds of things were living on the ground. I was always looking outwards and never looking at the ground. And it's completely different now, and I find this sort of stuff just so fascinating. I mean, it's just sitting in my hand now. It's curled up because it thinks it thinks it's in danger and it's sat there. But I can feel it. It's almost like it's vibrating. Don't know what it's doing, but you can just feel it living. You can feel it, You can feel its body just doing whatever it does, and I can feel it in my hand, this little tremor, this little vibration. It's amazing. I was hoping maybe it was going to uncoil once it got settled in my hand, but I don't think it's going to, so I'm going to put it back on the grass, off the path, which is why I picked it up, because it was hiding under a stone on the path. I would surely perish. There we go, let's put it back down there and see if that makes any difference. I'm not sure it's going to, it probably still knows I'm here. But it's beautiful though, look at the markings on it. It's amazing. Right, try again. Moving on. Actually, another reason, the main reason I'm faffing a lot is actually I'm just really enjoying myself. It is nice. It is really nice to be out again, even if it isn't, you know, a massive hill. It's just nice being out. It's just nice being out. Well, I think it's fair to say that after a break of April, May, June, July, 5 or 6 months, I'm a bit out of practice. I'm just blethering, rambling more than usual about nothing in particular. So apologies for that. There's no structure or anything today. Used to this. Bit of a haul. It's deceptive. You know, it doesn't look that big. But you know what people look like when they're on top of it. It's still a long way. And that's us joined back up with the official path. Seemingly with a short scramble. As with all these tours, there's always a little bit of excitement to get to the top of them. And then all too soon you're at the top. Not bad. As with all these tours, like all the ones on top of Benvironment and Benvironment and Benvironment, it seems so incongruous just having these massive, great big tours on top of otherwise featureless moorland. But it's nice. It's like I like it. You know, it adds. There's another one over my shoulder, but it adds interest to what otherwise isn't it? It's not a boring landscape, but it's nice to have things that break it up to some extent, I suppose. All these tours on top of Benvironment, Clachnaben, they're granite from rock that was oozed as magma about 420 something million years ago. But because it's granite, it means that, you know, your granite's got those quite big crystals in it, quite big chunks. It's not like basalt, which is also a volcanic rock, where you can barely see crystals in basalt because they're so small, and because the longer you have rock, molten rock, under heat and pressure, the bigger the crystals grow. And then granite, because it usually forms well. Granite doesn't form, it's not one of these ones that, you know, when lava pours over a landscape and solidifies, you won't get granite from that. Granite needs great pressure, great heat, so it happens a long way down. So all these rocks would have formed about 5 to 8 kilometers underground. And because they're under heat and pressure for so long, the crystals get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why we've got these wonderfully grippy chunks, see, that form granite. You know, you get that in the cairngorms. You know, the further into the central cairngorms over there, you get, you know, the rock is quite gritty, with big crystals, big silica crystals and quartz and stuff like that. Granite, that's why it's quite grippy. But this is all part of the same thing. And apparently, even though it was, you know, 5 to 8 kilometres underground, 420 something million years ago, it would have formed an almost continuous seam of magma, of molten rock between the Monolea and Mount Batuk, which is over there. So it was an enormous area. And then just over the years, over the millions of years, there's been upheavals and there's been glaciation, and, you know, and now you've got the tops revealed here like this. But it's a really peculiar feature in the landscape. That over there is Mount Batuk, which is a Corbett. That's probably the highest thing close to here. You have to go, the central cairngorms is much further over there. And that's the way I was planning on going out. You can see there's a track going into the distance along there. When I was deciding where to come, originally I was going to go to a hill called, which is about the same height as this one, called the Hill of Wirren, and which is over there behind Mount Batuk. But then I remembered something Chris Townsend had written about a couple of years ago after he'd done the TGO challenge across country and come through this part of the Highlands, and he wrote a blog post. I think his blog was called the Desolation of the Eastern Highlands or the Eastern Grampians, I'm not sure. But anyway, he wrote this post about just what a depressing experience it was walking through this. It's all grouse moor, of course, it's all for shooting. There's fences, there's electric fences, you know, 8-foot high deer fences, roads left, right and centre. It's a hideous, desolate, bleak place now. And it's just not a very nice place to walk through. And I was getting all my stuff together and planning on going over there. Then I just suddenly remembered just what a depressing experience it is to go there. So I thought I'd come a bit further east here, where you're right on the edge of it here. It's nowhere near as bad. Although you can see that there are access tracks coming up here where people are being driven up to shoot. But it is one of these places, even here, which is, I mean, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, yes, there's burnt moors where you can see where upland grouse management is going on, but over there behind me, over my left shoulder, there's nothing. It's a nice empty landscape, but you need to enjoy this while you can, because there's an application, I don't know if it's been submitted or just scoping, but there's an application going in for a wind farm, the Glendy wind farm over there, all in there. And you can see there's already one over here. Let's see, there's one over that side, but it's going to be slap bang, I think, on those hills over there. It's about 3 or 4 kilometres to the south of here, on those hills there. And it's going to be, well, originally it was going to be 37 wind turbines. I think it's come down to 26. Each one's going to be 150 metres high, and if you want an equivalent scale, it's as high as the towers on the current 4th road bridge. 26 of those in there, and it's not a wildland area, as you know, one of those ones designated by SNH. It's not one of those, but this is still, apart from that hideousness over Mount Batuk and beyond, this is still fairly, you know, untouched in terms of obvious intrusions. So if you want to come up here, the Clachnaben, I recommend doing it sooner rather than later, because all of that over there is soon just going to be a mess. It does seem that piece by piece, you know, even the cairngorms is getting whittled away, nibbled left, right and centre. Especially from wind farms. I mean, it has abated somewhat. I mean, that whole rush in the early 2000s up until about 2 or 3 years ago, you'd think they would have exhausted everywhere to put them now, because there was such a sort of prospecting going on in terms of the sites, you know, and cold calling of landowners and all that sort of stuff. So you'd think that maybe somewhere like this, you still can't quite believe it's going to go in. I mean, Aberdeenshire Council, they refused planning permission for the mast, you know, the mast that the wind farms put up, and they have I can't even say that, anemometer to gauge wind speed at the top, just to sort of gauge how effective it's going to be for a wind farm. They refused permission for it, but the Scottish Government overturned it in that way that they seem prone to doing. in that very centralising way that they seem to like enjoy destroying local democracy. Anyway, I want to end on a downer. You know, this first blog in several months. Let's just forget about that for the moment and just enjoy this location for what it is at the moment. The good thing about it is because it's I mean, it's not, as I say, it's not high, 589 meters, something like that, but because it's quite prominent all by itself, this rock, you do get the sense that the hill's more isolated than it is. So it's a nice place to sit. It'd be a good place in winter, I think, when the cornices are forming all around it. Right, I think we'll head down.